And we're live on YouTube also.
Thanks for me.
No problem. Oh, good amount of attendees so far. Katie, whenever you're ready to start, and I'm not suggesting you start just yet, it's just 6 o'clock now. I have to call roll.
Yeah, we'll do 2 after.
Sounds good to me.
Great. Cynthia Felix should be on the committee list. I think in the mix of things, she's somebody that wants to be on it. Just to mention, to add to the roll call.
But we need to get that in writing. So either you or she, well, she should send us the email.
You got it. Sounds good. If you're just joining, thank you. We're going to do roll call in a minute for the committee members, and then we'll get started. Thanks, everybody.
Katie, I've got 3 after now, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Well, I'll just kick off and say we're going to get started for the special subcommittee meeting on last mile facilities, and we'll start out by Jeremy doing roll call for the community board 7 members.
Good evening, everybody. You should know how I do this by now. I'm going to mute everybody. When I call your name, and I'm only calling committee members, please unmute yourself and acknowledge your name, and then mute yourself again. And if you are a member of the board but not a committee member, I'm not going to call your name, but I see you on our list and I will write your name down. So let's start with Katie Walsh.
Present.
Thank you. Nick Azadian.
Present.
Thank you. Gladys Bruno. John Fontillis.
Present. Also Gladys just joined.
Thank you. I will call her again. Cynthia Gonzalez.
Present.
Thank you. Zachary Jassy. Christina Lem.
I'm here.
Thank you. Sam Sierra. Brian Slater.
Present. Sam Sierra's present.
Thank you, Sam. Gladys Bruno.
Present. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Chairperson Cesar Zuniga.
Present.
Thank you. That's everybody. Katie, I'm gonna write down folks' names from the list as well.
Okay, that's great. Jeremy, I had a slide that I just wanted to put up if possible.
No problem. I just need to make you a co-host. And you should be able to do that now.
Okay, that's great. All I'm doing is just putting up the agenda for a quick second. And then let me put this as a Full presentation mode. Okay, great. Thank you everybody for making time. A lot of places you probably need to be and should be, but you showed up for tonight's meeting on the CB7 Special Subcommittee meeting on last mile trucking facilities. This is our agenda for the evening. We are going to open up and do a brief welcome and summary of what we've heard so far. I would like to ask the community board committee members of the subcommittee, if I can turn to you in this first part on some of your reflections of what you've heard so far from the May and July meetings, any observations to date, and sort of your thoughts on next steps. So I'm going to do that first. You don't have to go, but that would be really helpful to get some observations. Okay, and then the second part, we are really appreciative and of the assembly member, Marcela Mateus is on the call herself, as well as a very robust team that is going to be presenting. That'll take probably about 20 minutes. So we want to make sure we leave enough time for both the presentation and the Q&A in those 20 minutes. And then we have a presentation, not slides, but just talking through insights from both UPROS and Earth Justice that are working on this topic more broadly, both in our district as well as throughout New York City. And then we'll go to public comment. We have 3 minutes each for that. And then we will go to the committee discussion on next steps. So what I would like to do is just frame up some very preliminary comments here to offer up that this is now the third meeting that the Community Board 7 has had on this particular acute issue on last mile trucking facilities. This is something that has been a slow build in terms of identifiable challenge that our district is facing, and one that we are not alone in. The first meeting that we had in May, different individuals, community members, organizations, Community Board 7 members stepped up to vocalize their concerns and considerations. It was a bit of a fact-finding conversation. What do we know about these last mile facilities? Who's building them? Where are they happening? Where are they projected to happen? And what do we know about the relative impacts of those? Recognizing that this is not just a Community Board 7 challenge here in Sunset Park, but this is something that is also acutely being felt in Red Hook. We hosted the next meeting, which was in July, with a community board in Red Hook. That meeting was very well attended, and just like the May meeting. And in that meeting, again, we heard shared concerns and challenges, and we started to steer towards and have recommendations on what could be next, what could next steps look like, and understanding both what could happen at the city level, congressional level, and then the state. So following that joint meeting, we've now come back as a committee, because this committee, Community Board 7, has not met together to really have a discussion yet about what we've heard so far in May and July. We're here today because there has been work that has been progressing on what are some of these options available, both at the state level and community level, to address last mile facilities. And that's sort of where we're going to go in the discussion today. And I'd really like to end with a committee discussion, Community Board 7 committee discussion on where do we go from here. There's going to be a new administration in January. We have, again, growing and shared challenges and concerns that we're working on. And so really being able to kind of get a bit more specific on next steps that the community board is suggesting. At this point, what I would like to do is I'll first go to Cesar, and then I'm going to go to some community board members who are in this committee and just ask for things that you've heard in May and July that you want to mention and thoughts on next steps. Keep them brief, please, so that we can get to the presentation. And with that, can I go to Cesar? Thank you. And if you are community board, sorry, Cesar, if you're community board 7 member, if you can just put your hand up so then we know to call on you. Cesar, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. And thank you everyone who has shown up today, both from the board and from the community. I can think of 1,000 other things that we could all be doing, but obviously this is really important. So the only thing that I want to, my observations over the last couple of months really reflect and center around DOT's behavior toward this community. We are hearing that DOT is moving forward with with a whole bunch of very problematic proposals. I attended a meeting in September where DOT presented their plan to convert 7th and 8th Avenue into one-way streets. I cannot tell you how passionate and how outraged the community was at that meeting, because not so much with the proposal, frankly, because I think the idea of the proposal is still it's still out there, the jury's still out, but it's just the sort of disregard for community input, for community perspectives about what kind of planning we want to see on our streets. I've also heard from folks regarding the 20th Street truck rerouting that now is 39th Street. Again, another egregious display of DOT just really doing what they think they need to do without any real insight or input from the community. The fact that they let us know, a whopping 13 hours before starting their actual reconversion of the city is just like a real signal, for me anyway, that DOT is not interested in community perspectives or community feedback. So I think, as we think about the implications that DOT has with last mile trucking facilities, what I, and I'm always the eternal optimist that, the new reconfiguration of our local government in the council and the new administration presents us with an opportunity to send a clear message to the new administration, to the new council, that our expectation and our desire is for more community input, from your community feedback. And you know what? It's messy, it's complicated, it's time consuming, but particularly for a district like ours, where we've just had an utter failure in leadership across the board. This is the only way forward for the administration, for the agencies to sit down, to embrace the complications, to embrace the messiness of having a community come to the table and co-plan and co-develop the future of our neighborhoods. I think part of what I would like to see from this committee and from the work that comes out of it is a real concerted effort to bring together the new local government, the state and the federal government, because obviously, given the geography of our district, we're going to need all of these levels of government to be present and to be able to tolerate the input and the ideas that we have for how we want to see our district developed. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to let Katie. Thank you so much, Katie, for doing this work. It's really important. It has massive implications for the quality of life in our district, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So just at the top, this is for Community Board 7 committee members. If you want to reflect on what you've heard so far and next steps recommendations, if you just want to put your hand up, and then we will continue on with the other agenda items. But I see only one other hand right now, and that's Nick Azadian.
Certainly. So one of the takeaways, and this is to not so much take away Cesar's thunder, but it's also been a, very, horrible showing by the Department of Transportation in pretty much all aspects of their responsibilities. But more so than that, it's their general approach where they attempt to fit whatever is going on in the neighborhood into some kind of citywide model that they've generated without actually taking into the fact that each neighborhood is different. And not only that, their approach is reactive and not proactive. So whenever they're doing their models, they're not taking into account all of the new inputs, such as, in this case, last mile trucking and what that's going to do to the neighborhood, or how changing one street is going to impact the traffic on another. So it's not only a failure of leadership, but it's also a failure in implementation of plans. There's no real cognitive thinking going into any of this, which in our neighborhood, has very devastating results along Third in terms of traffic fatalities, which should only get worse based on, additional trucking that is going to come out of these facilities. So not only do we have a Department of Transportation problem in the leadership that doesn't want to listen to the community, but also in terms of the actual technical backing in making decisions. With that aside, none of the agencies want to pick this up. Department of Transportation says we can't deny curb cuts. We only look at traffic. Department of Building says we can't deny permits because that's not our job to do. If it's in the zoning, they can do it. So none of the agencies are all playing hot potato with this. So, someone needs to essentially take the lead and say, what are we going to do about this? And look at this as a whole. Otherwise, you're going to piecemeal the neighborhood to death. And that is not something that I want to abide. And that's really the main takeaway that I've gotten. And I'm very happy that the assembly member is here. And, I would like to see some of the other electeds that represent this and Red Hook potentially invited in future meetings, because the only real answer is going to be a legislative solution, because the city just does not seem to have an interest in tackling this.
Thank you, Nick. I'll pass to John for those joining. We're just asking our Community Board 7 subcommittee members if they can just offer reflections on what they heard from the May and July meetings. What came out very clearly, this is in the minutes, we had the Department of City Planning present and the Department of Transportation present in the July meeting. And in summary, the presentation is these are as of right facilities. There is nothing that we have the ability to do with the current zoning and regulations. And so that's what Nick is referring to. And that's in the minutes, both from the Department of Transportation and DCP presentations. John Fantillis, I'll turn to you because I see your hand up.
Thanks, Katie. And again, thanks so much for organizing this and taking us through as the chair of this committee. I would just like to say, I find it very odd because DOT just sent us a letter about a school that we were reviewing on 44th Street that essentially was saying, oh, no, we don't think the school should be here because of all the truck traffic. And when I was reading the letter, I'm going, does the right hand of DOT not know what the left hand is doing? The fact of the matter is the reason why there's truck traffic is because you put it there, and the issues are related to that. So I find it interesting that DOT is essentially using every tool on that's available to them to get what they want, essentially. I think the other big thing that was kind of really surprising is just to see, I think in July, you showed the map of facilities that are in development. And in the abstract, I thought, oh, okay, I know there are a bunch in Red Hook. I was just there over the weekend. I mean, the one at the Revere site is already, 50 feet in the air. The one that's to the east of IKEA is almost completely done. And these things are sprouting up like mushrooms. It's just really amazing how quickly, and Nick and I build buildings. These things seem to be going up faster than I think any other project that I've ever seen. The amount of time and effort being spent is just it's moving along very quickly. So which in a way just sort of brings me to the impacts. I think obviously traffic routes and pathways and safety and health impacts are primary. We got to figure out a way, I think, to understand the data so we can push back against the issues that are involved. But part of me just feels that we're sticking our fingers in the dam that's collapsing, because online ordering is not going to abate. No one's going to stop ordering from Amazon. It's only going to get worse. So how do we deal with that on a local basis when the impact is being generated from around the city, which really just leads me to process. And both Cesar and Nick kind of hinted at that. What is the process? What can we do to actually affect a change? We're just one little old community board. Partly, I think be really great if we could put some barriers up to prevent trucks from going through the neighborhood. But, short of that, I don't know what the process is to actually make change, but for making sure that a lot of people are knowledgeable what's going on. A lot of people are aware of the dangers and the impacts. I do think electrification of the trucks may be a stopgap answer. We certainly think that people who are trying to deliver stuff in the city are already using smaller trucks. We did it for taxis as well, right? I mean, we were able to say to TLC to say in the future you'll be using electric vehicles for taxis. Maybe we could do it for trucks. That's something that is, extraordinary, that would force the industry to heal. Because I really don't know how we can change it using the tools that we have. So that sounds really depressing. I'm sorry, but that's kind of the things that I took away from the May and July meetings, that the task is so huge, but we got to find some magic pixie dust to throw on DOT to change them in some way.
Right. So I think what we're gonna move towards at the end of the committee meeting is what is that scalpel, and really kind of identifying what are some things, the levers at the community board level, or maybe one, but this is also city, state, congressional. So that actually might be a very good transition to the assembly member's office and presentation. We'll see that map again.
Katie?
But
Sorry,
yes.
this is Jeremy. I just don't have a raise hand function of my
Oh,
own.
please.
I just want to correct one thing that John said, and it may seem petty, but I think it's in context to what was stated earlier from other folks who spoke. DOT never sent us that letter, John. DOT does not communicate well. I got that letter from Board of Standards and Appeals.
Right.
So that's another example of DOT. They referenced watching our committee, our public hearing on our YouTube channel, but they never spoke to us. Sorry, Katie.
Okay,
I felt that necessary.
Okay, that's fair. Cesar, did you have your hand up, or should we?
Yeah, just quickly, because I think this is, for me, John said something that I really want us to really think about, right? Because this isn't a conversation about, let's defeat capitalism, right? This is a conversation of like, what are the solutions, right? That are out there that may not be part of the present or the current set of tools that we have, but that could that could be tools that could be added either through legislation or through some policy shifts that don't require legislation. Because look, guys, I mean, the reality is that the solutions are out there. I can think of a handful of cities around the world who also have last mile needs, and who order on Amazon, and where solutions are being implemented. And I think John alluded to some of those solutions. So yes, let's keep talking about what the problems are, but let's also put the solutions on the table, because they exist. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We are not the first city who has narrow streets, who has a waterway, and who has all of this e-commerce going on, right? So this is not about like these like big philosophical conversations about, capitalism versus some other economic system. It's about what are the solutions, and how can we bring them about in our context.
Okay, thank you. So I think what I'd love to do as we move towards that solution generating, next up in the agenda, I saw you earlier. I think Assemblymember Marcelo Mantegnas is on and starting out, and then I know there's several folks who are going to be panelists. So can I turn over to you?
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, CP7. Thank you, Catherine, for giving us the space to do a presentation. I am Assemblymember Marcelo Mantegnas. I represent the 51st Assembly District. That's Red Hook, Sunset Park, and Powder Bay Ridge. Before we start, I also just want to kind of echo a little bit what John said. I know it doesn't sound great, but I know that together we can come together and find a solution. And if nothing else, we always have hope. If I listened to everybody who told me that things couldn't get done, nothing would happen, right? And let's not forget the huge community victory in not allowing Industry City to expand with the forces that were there. But to get us back on track and talking about today, I want to share what my office has been working on over the last 4 months as we begin this process to explore legislative avenues. My office has assembled a volunteer research team of people from Red Hook and Sunset Park residents that are interested in the policy research. I want to make it clear, my vision for my office is to always take the community's lead. And so anyone who is interested in being part of the legislative process can. And I want to make sure that folks understand that we own this work together. That being said, I hope that this is the beginning of a community conversation about what we want to do, what our goals are, and then actually come up with a plan on achieving those goals. And so what we're doing today is sharing some of the results of the research that we've done and what we believe are the most promising legislative interventions at the state level. Nothing is set in stone. We are very much interested in feedback, and we want directional guidance from the community. And we want to make sure that we're having an open conversation. So with that, we do have a presentation and slides prepared. And I'm going to turn it over to one of our volunteers, Noah.
Hi, my name is Noah Atchison. I'm one of the volunteers on the research group. And I'm a volunteer. I live in Red Hook. I can actually see one of the facilities out my window right now and have watched it go up. Do we know who's running the actual presentation?
Do you guys need me to share slides?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can share screen. Ooh. Jeremy.
So I need to give you permission to do that. Jenny, you're going to be sharing your screen?
Yes, I can do that. And then also, can we also promote Andrea Sampson up to a panelist as well? She's going to be sharing.
I'll do that. In the meantime, you're a co-host. You could share your screen.
Awesome. Okay, let's go.
Perfect.
Okay, sorry. In the beginning.
Here we go. So just, Marcella gave a great introduction. We have pretty limited time, so I'm going to try and, you all have been at these meetings before. We're going to try and go through some of the background relatively quickly, but, we're hopefully going to have time for questions at the end. So, feel free to stop and if anything's super unclear. As you all have heard, there's not actually a definition of state at the state or city level of what last mile shipping is. So we're going to, define it for the purposes of this presentation as the movement of products from some transportation hub to its final destination, which is people's homes. It doesn't necessarily mean it's actually 1 mile. It is, whatever that final leg of the journey is. As you can see here, this is a map courtesy of Councilmember Menchaca's office. There are right now 6 planned or likely logistics properties in the district. 5 of these are in Red Hook. One of them is in Sunset Park. As of now, I believe only one of them is operational, which is the Amazon Flex facility at 537 Columbia, 537 to 555 Columbia, which is right there. Amazon Fresh, it is labeled. And that has, as of the last couple of weeks, started operating. You'll see they have, these are pretty big buildings that are coming up. This is the Sunset Park facility. The vast majority of these buildings are dedicated to warehousing goods and also warehousing the vehicles used to deliver the goods. If you squint, you might actually be able to see that in some of these renderings, they have 53-foot trailers, which are not legal. So, they're definitely planning for a large volume of freight to be coming in and out. There are a plethora of impacts to these facilities. This is not intended to be a comprehensive list. One of the issues that came up when we were researching this is that because of the growth of e-commerce, because it's been so fast, there's not a lot of long-term research on what the impacts of these facilities are on neighborhoods. So, you can tell the impact of increased truck traffic historically, but in terms of, there are lots of communities around the country where you're seeing a huge number of these coming up incredibly quickly, and we're not sure what the long-term impacts are, and we won't because it's all happening across the country around the same time. In terms of what the rest of this presentation is going to look like, we're going to be talking about, how this happened, what our research process was, and then some promising legislative avenues before turning it back over to you. So how did this happen? To figure out how to address the problem, we have to have some sort of understanding of how these facilities were built without any community input or involvement. There's been a big increase in the demand for e-commerce, which had only intensified during the pandemic. There are tons of these facilities cropping up again all over the country. Currently, our waterfront is zoned for industrial use, and the current zoning code does not distinguish between industrial warehousing and last mile shipping. So these facilities could be built as of right. So they didn't have to apply for a zoning variance. So there was no ULURP process and no community engagement as part of this. Further, they did not actually receive any discretionary government benefits. They weren't like applying for grants as far as we know, where they would actually have to do more disclosures or data reporting as part of receiving that money. We're still looking into, whether or not there were other things that didn't require extra disclosures that they got, but, we don't know, as far as we know, they weren't, getting this as part of a program where they would have to do some form of community engagement. There's also just a general lack of regulation around health and the environment. A lot of the zoning codes, especially around manufacturing, are very, very old. So this is, taken it's just not up to the scale of what's happening right now, especially as it pertains to trucking. This is a just sort of map of, you guys are probably all very familiar with this on the community board side, but you'll notice that, most of the waterfront is zoned either M1 or M3. And I think the important thing, especially for the Sunset Park, community, is knowing that, these facilities are still as of right. There's nothing preventing any of these from, beginning to build, there's nothing preventing more of these from cropping up in this area with little to no involvement from the community. And with that, I believe I'll turn it over to Jenny to go over the research process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Noah. Hi, everybody. My name is Jenny. I work for the Office of the Assembly Member. I'm going to talk a little bit about what our process has been so far and kind of what we found based on all the research that we've done to date. So, we kind of started with the forums that had been convened by this community board as well as other community groups, very much learning from work that had already been done in the community and trying to build upon it in community with everyone else, sharing our progress as we went and gathering feedback. Coming out of the last joint CB6, CB7 meeting, our office had identified 5 key avenues for exploration in state level policy. So as Noah was mentioning before, zoning is such a critical piece of this puzzle, and that's something that we'll touch upon a little bit later. But there are additional interventions that can be explored at the state level from a number of different dimensions in order to get a better handle on this problem. So you can probably refer to, I'm sure Katie has some meeting minutes from that prior meeting. We had touched upon these 5 key avenues as places to start to see what we could do through state law. After that last meeting, we started assembling our research team. So as Marcelo was saying before, the philosophy of our office is very much that this is an office that belongs to the community. We don't want a big separation between staff and community members. We want to bring in anyone who's interested into the legislative process, to have meetings with central staff, to be part of the drafting process, to be part of the lobbying process. And so we've assembled a small team of Red Hook and Sunset Park residents to focus on really fleshing out what these avenues could be. We've convened a number of different meetings to brainstorm and discuss our results as we go back to the community and gather more feedback. So all of this is ongoing. It's not really, done, and it's not going to be for a little while. So based on all that process so far, I guess this is really the meat of our presentation today. Here's what we've identified as some promising legislative avenues at the state level that we could pursue. We're thinking about as soon as the legislative session starts next year, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So in exploring legislative avenues, it's really important to understand where there's potential and also what the limitations might be. And there are a lot of limitations for this issue in particular. If there weren't, we would already have a handle on it. There'd be a really obvious solution, but we really needed to dig deep to find what could potentially work. So I'll start off by discussing air quality. So this was one of the 5 avenues that we had initially wanted to explore at the state level. The reason being that New York State, through the Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, actually already has regulatory authority over air quality for the state. So if you wanted to come along and let's say you're a producer, a big chemical plant manufacturer, there's already an existing process that you have to go through the DEC to get your plant approved because the state is concerned with health impacts. They are concerned with air quality and making sure there's not something that's really toxic in the air affecting residents. So under existing DEC permitting processes, facilities are required to obtain 2 types of permits if they are heavy polluters or emitters. These are the Title V permit and the state air facility permit. The Title V is slightly more stringent, and so it's for larger facilities. The state air facility permit is kind of a level below that. If you don't meet, very high emission thresholds, you're required to get a state air facility permit. So there's already this process that allows us to kind of start to get a handle on this issue. However, when we were exploring this avenue, the problem that we ran into was that this process currently only applies to stationary sources or sources on contiguous properties. So don't want to get too technical here for the purposes of tonight, because I know that there may be a lot of people who are kind of looking at this issue for the first time. But this is all to say they only care about the emissions that are coming from the facility itself, the stationary locked facility itself. They don't really care about trucks, which, as we know, for these facilities is where the majority of the emissions and the negative impact is going to come from. So that was immediately a hurdle that we ran into. And to talk about how we can maybe start to change some of that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna from our team, who's going to talk about the indirect source rule.
Hi, everybody. So as Jenny mentioned, air pollution emissions are presently regulated at their direct sources. So think of smokestacks, chimneys, and tailpipes, which means that even though increasing local trucking is largely the point of opening a last mile warehouse, warehouses in general are only evaluated for emissions coming from the buildings themselves, which is a tiny fraction of their total impact. But states do have the power to recognize trucking facilities as an indirect source of trucking emissions, and then regulate or restrict those accordingly through an indirect source rule. So that could be an informational and structural law, which would require facilities to track and report emissions and leave the regulatory aspects of that to the Department of Environmental Conservation, or we could advocate for more specific measures depending on feedback from the community.
Awesome. So one thing that was really evident in all the conversations that we've had, both in Red Hook and Sunset Park, is that this is a very, very urgent issue and it requires an emergency response. So one thing that seemed to resonate a lot with the community is this idea of pursuing an emergency moratorium. So for those of you who don't know, a moratorium would essentially purport to halt new facilities while we study their impacts. It's rare for moratoriums to be indefinite. They're usually lifted contingent on, some study being done or a certain amount of years, things like that. However, when we were exploring this option, we also ran into a problem, which is that moratoriums are often designed around existing government processes and siting, permitting and siting processes. So this all is to say that the government already needs to have its teeth in a certain process in order for us to say, okay, you can no longer grant permits to this particular type of facility. I'm going to use an example here, which is sewer sludge facilities. So as you know, our sewer system, it is what it is. There's probably a lot of sludge there. This is, a type of facility with a very heavy environmental impact. And there was recently proposed a moratoria on the siting of these specific facilities so that people can study their disproportionate impact on certain communities. Where this problem differs from last mile is that the government already has its teeth in the permitting of these facilities. It's regulated by the DEC. They get to decide whether a facility can be sited or not. When that is the case, you can easily design a moratorium by just saying the DEC should no longer approve these facilities for a period of 1 to 3 years, whatever it may be, while we study their impacts. So the overarching conclusion is that the government needs to have at least one point of intervention in the process for us to design an effective moratorium. And this ties to what Anna was talking about earlier. Although we don't currently have that point of intervention in the process, there is this possibility that through an indirect source rule, we could have that lever and then design a moratorium around it. But this would be a more complicated, it's kind of like a two-step process. You have to first extend the authority of the regulating body and then put in a moratorium on that regulating body. It is rare for that to happen both at once. Usually, you extend the authority, it exists for a few years, then you say there's a moratorium for XYZ reason, we need to get a better handle, we need more time to get a better handle on this problem. So that's kind of what we discovered in this process, which is, it's not to say that it's impossible to do this, but it's to say that, this comes with its share of challenges. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea right now to talk a little bit about the tax incentive angle.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, everyone. So regarding tax incentives, there's a process called the State Environmental Quality Review, SEQR, which is required when the government takes any discretionary funding or approval actions. And because tax incentives are a form of government spending, they could trigger this SEQR process if they are granted on a discretionary basis. This process also requires that an environmental impact study be conducted, as well as a public comment process, so that the community can organize and voice any opposition. And that's where we are now, is trying to figure out how tax incentives may be involved. So if you have any questions on this process, you can ask them here or get in touch with Marcella's team. Thank you.
Awesome. And then the final piece we wanted to talk about is city level interventions. It's evident that no matter what we do, it needs to be at multiple levels of government. And so we're hoping that city interventions can very much, spur enthusiasm around state level interventions and vice versa. So I wanted to turn it over back to Noah to discuss this piece.
Yeah, so there's a ton that can happen on the city level, right? You can have, special permitting through the zoning process. You can create low emission zones. There are, a lot of options here. Again, because Assemblymember Mateus is in the state assembly, we have focused on the state level interventions, but that does not mean that there is nothing that can be done at the city level. So this is sort of here just again to say that a lot of especially the shorter term solutions to this are going to happen at the city level while sort of the state process, rolls. Hopefully this can be a good opportunity to sort of think through where some of those, as Jenny said, sort of areas of overlap can be to sort of, something happens at the state level that allows something to happen at the city level and vice versa. These two hands can sort of, unlike many New York City agencies, in terms of our strategy on this issue, we can sort of have the left hand talking to the right one.
Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what comes next in terms of the plan for our team at the state level. So we're currently in the end of October. It's pretty scary. I cannot believe that Thanksgiving is in a month. But anyways, so from now through December is really the time to get to consensus around what exact policy intervention we want to pursue. We've laid out a few different ideas. We've laid out a few different approaches that vary both in terms of their aggressiveness, but also in terms of their just feasibility. So from now through November, we're very much in the process of policy refinement, trying to draft policy outlines with feedback from the community. We want to hear thoughts. We want to hear if someone here thinks that the moratorium is the way to go, even if it's ambitious. We want to hear if people think that's not likely, that's not politically possible, there's not going to be support or momentum for it, if people have other issues with it. In December, we're kind of preparing for the start of the legislative session. So this is when we would be in the process of drafting and actually introducing the legislation. Once we hit January, the legislative session begins, which Marcella can attest to is a pretty wild and crazy time. And so it's all about lobbying, getting support for the bill. This is where the issue becomes much bigger than just Sunset Park or Red Hook. We really need to get the buy-in of other communities, other legislators, not just directly impacted communities such as the South Bronx or North Brooklyn, but also all the communities in between. We really need to make the case that this is a statewide issue. And all throughout that time, what we really need to do is just continue our community organizing and escalation. So I'm hoping that other individuals who I know are here, who've been involved in a lot of that community organizing, can speak more to this piece, but continuing outreach and education, actions to bring more people in, to attract media attention, and also continuing this process of policy research, which is not just in order to introduce legislation, but to also gear up for the opposition that we should very much expect from all of these players that we are up against. So it's a pretty aggressive timeline and a pretty compressed one, but I think we're pretty on track and just excited to kind of hear the feedback from everybody here to the ideas that we've presented. Just a quick note, we're very much still expanding our policy research team. There's a lot more work to do. We want to invite everyone here on the community board to be a part of that legislative process, to be really involved in the nitty-gritty of negotiating this bill, both what it looks like and what the end product is, because negotiations happen in between, things get cut, that kind of thing. We really want the input of the community throughout that process. You can also just take action. So if you're not necessarily a policy research mind, but you care a lot about this issue, there is a South Brooklyn Community Coalition that is formed around this issue. I created a little bit.ly here. So it's bit.ly last mile sign up. If you're interested, I know individuals here are involved in the organizing of that. But what can you do as a constituent? You just live in the community, you're very concerned about this, and you want to see whatever legislative efforts we come up with succeed. Reach out to your friends in both your neighborhood and other neighborhoods to educate them about this issue. It's important that we start educating beyond just our community because of the fact that this is a state level legislative fight. There's the opportunity to reach out to state and city environmental agencies to continue to highlight this issue. And I also wanted to mention that right now is the CLCPA open comment period. So this is state level legislation that was introduced back in 2019 to really help New York State be on track to hit its emissions targets. They have this open comment period. Anyone can send a comment. The email address is right here. So there's a number of different ways to get involved, but we're also just very curious to hear everybody's thoughts on what we've presented today. And yeah, thank you, Katie and everyone on Community Board 7 for the time. And yeah, we look forward to working with you to try to solve this problem.
Thank you, Jenny. And what I'm going to do, we have another presentation that's coming up from Uprose and Earth Justice. But in this period of time that we have the Assembly Member's Office and the Assembly Member, I hope you all can stay. I want to open this up to Community Board 7 members. If you have a question, to raise your hand so that I can call on you. This is the time to ask any additional questions. I did want to just elucidate on one thing that I heard in the presentation about city level interventions. That is not, it's not on deck right now in terms of presentation. I really appreciate that the State Assembly Member's Office teed this up. And as a for example, the city of Santa Monica in Los Angeles has just implemented and pioneered the first ever zero emissions delivery zone. And that is in response to delivery and trucking and this rise again in the actual delivery mechanisms. And so we have some examples, but that's on the delivery side, right? This is also about the origination and distribution. So we're tackling both of these issues in Sunset Park and Red Hook. Community Board 7 members, questions, and I saw a hand up. Sorry, I don't know who was first, but I will just call on John Quintillis.
Thanks, Katie. Just a question. Marcella's group, you had mentioned that the air quality emitting authority related to DEC doesn't apply to mobile trucks. My understanding in construction, there's something called the idling law that doesn't allow diesel trucks to idle for longer than 5 minutes, meaning that they have to shut them off. They can't be, on the construction site. Wouldn't that apply to this as well? Sort of last mile facilities that if they're in movement, I mean, it doesn't really solve our problem with traffic and safety. But if we can make it more onerous for diesel trucks to operate, and I believe that's a standard DEC law that applies to all mobile trucks that are diesel operated, wouldn't that help push to more zero emission vehicles or electrification of the fleet?
Yeah, so I can jump in there. John, you're totally right. Idling is something that is regulated at the state level, and it is a possible intervention that we want to explore. The overall, mindset that we came to try and explore this problem with is that we wanted to be able to stop the proliferation of future facilities. And so, a lot of this is about mitigating the impacts, about trying to encourage trucks to transition from diesel to clean fuel standards. But, we also wanted to be able to just kind of stop future facilities altogether. But I do think that idling is a piece of this, and it is something that has come up in our explorations, in our discussions, and would be interested to kind of talk further with you on any ideas that we can pursue there.
Well, it's just you were saying we don't have the ability on the state level to target a mobile emitter, but I believe the law is that if a DEC police officer sees that the truck has been going for 5 minutes, it could be a fine of $520,000, and that again, it's a small thing, and I don't know how it fits into the bigger scheme of things, but I thought it's law that's on the books right now that there is. I mean, every construction project we do in the city, that has to be complied with. So why wouldn't that be the same for projects that are under construction that are essentially giant garages for trucks?
Yep, you're totally right. And I think a big part of the question is also just enforcement. We can start to design all these laws, but what if they're just not enforced? What if there aren't people monitoring these emissions? And that's a question through all of these interventions that we have to think about.
I'd also like to jump in that while that does regulate some of the behavior of the trucks, that doesn't regulate the number of trucks or where they go or how they will be localized within these warehouses. So there's still a lot of emissions related to a particular warehouse that's not attached to this warehouse or to the permitting process for the warehouse.
Okay, I'm going to go to Cynthia Gonzalez and then Karen Rolnick and Nick Azadian and then Cesar. So Cynthia Gonzalez, you're up.
Hear me?
Yes. Now we can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm having a problem with my unmute button here. My question is, when you talked about the impacts, you stated that it was stated in that particular slide that the existing laws around health and environment do not apply to last mile. The question is this because they're mobile? And what are the existing laws that can be applied?
Yeah, so I don't know if maybe Anna wants to jump in a little deeper on the indirect source rule, but what we were referring to is the idea that existing air quality permitting processes do not apply to last mile trucking. And so, we're trying to figure out how we can expand state authority to cover this specific activity. And that is where the indirect source rule comes into play.
But is that specifically because it's a mobile, if it's a mobile situation? Because then what John Fontillis was talking about is that, what's to stop them from idling there where they're, housed? So,
Yeah.
and what is the oversight? I mean, who's going to oversee that
Mhm.
in terms of the particular facility? Because they could be violating the law right there where they are, and then they're moving around and causing further impact.
So it's not exactly because they're mobile, but that is related. Each truck is treated as its own source of emissions. It's got one tailpipe, one direct source from which all of these air pollutants are going into the air. But if you're looking at each truck separately, then you're going to come under laws that'll say this is the fuel efficiency that the truck has to have. This is where it can and can't idle and for how long. But that doesn't address the fact that by building more last mile facilities, we'll be bringing a lot more trucks into the same area. And when permitting and zoning are issued, that doesn't take into account the emissions of all the trucks that it's going to bring in. It just takes into account the emissions of the warehouse building itself. So the trucks are regulated already, but they're regulated as series of individual trucks rather than understanding the whole impact of bringing one of these facilities.
So it would stand to reason that any legislative change would have to address that particular aspect of it. So then, and
Right.
that's where, the policy, drafting the policy is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia. Karen, Nick, Azadian, and then Cesar.
Hi, I guess I'm a pessimist. I don't have any hopes that we're going to actually stop these facilities from coming to our neighborhoods, but I do hope that we can mitigate some of the pollution and traffic. And, my train of thought is that assuming that for the most part, the largest trucks are going to be arriving to the facilities with cargo and the smaller trucks are going to be leaving. Wouldn't it make sense to somehow see if we can incentivize them arriving on the large trucks by rail, or even see this is a port, can we utilize the port? We've talked about in the past using a truck barge ferry system to get the larger trucks in and out. And is there a way we can, or maybe we are already looking at that?
Yeah, I think you bring up really good points, Karen. I know that, exploration of the port is something that people are very interested in, just port usage. I know that for areas like the South Bronx, rail is something that is already happening, and the transition to rail is very much something that they're already pursuing. I don't know what that looks like for Sunset Park and Red Hook.
We do have rail in Sunset Park,
Mhm.
and it's active and used. I heard it the other night.
Maritime as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so those are all options. I don't know that they would necessarily be legislative options. They would probably require the commitment of a city agency to be willing to do the investment to kind of develop these types of infrastructure. But that is something that, I do wish we had more traction with the city agencies. And what Nick was saying earlier around this being a hot potato issue that no one wants to kind of own and start to address. That's going to be a pretty big challenge in terms of opening up the ports and rail.
Well, I think there's already some infrastructure there, and I would like to see if we can incentivize these corporations, maybe through taxes or whatever, to utilize other modes of transportation. Thank you.
Okay, Nick and Cesar, I do see that there's some questions coming up. Got to mute. Okay, I've muted Cindy. Nick, do you want to go?
Sure. So my question is for the Assemblywoman's office. Specifically, it's let's say that we concoct a plan that will work, something that we believe is really going to be there. There's a second aspect of this, which is really the lobbying aspect of it. And just by going through, the number of bills that the Assemblywoman has tried to put through that she's sponsored, not many of them have gone through. So I guess, what is your strategy for lobbying the rest of the Assembly and then also the various state senators in order to try to get passage? Because, again, you're going to have to really corral a lot of cats to get this one to work. So what is the strategy for that?
So I think first we need to decide and come together as to what it is, what avenue we're going to pursue. And part of that conversation is exactly that, having a discussion about what path we can take to move forward. There is potential support in other communities where this is starting to happen. And, there's a discussion also about environmental justice. But to get back to some of what, Cesar said at the beginning, this is really being pushed by capital, right? And so we have to have the conversation about what we're going to pursue and how viable is it, right? Because we also have what looks like a mayor who is going to be pushing a recovery, right? They want this development. And so they're going to be courting businesses. And so we need to figure out what we want to do. And then we need to figure out how we're going to make it happen. And part of it is, we can talk about legislation, but some of the stuff we're discussing are things that we can do, but they're not going to, they're going to mitigate some of the issues, but not all of them. And so that's the larger conversation that we want to have. Are we going to say we can't stop this at all? Is that the decision that we're making now? We're just going to figure small solutions? Or are we going to really push and want, to stop all these businesses as it is? So that's part of what we're trying to develop here. And in order to have that conversation, we need to be able to understand what is capable, what we can do at the state level, what we can do at the city level, and how is that going to come together? So that's not something that I can answer right now. That's something that we're definitely looking at. And that is also some of the obstacles that we're seeing and trying to move forward. But, the way that I look at it is, we have to figure out the road to get to our destination. So it's important that we understand what the roadblocks are so we can figure out a detour around them.
Thank you.
Cesar, and then I just want to recognize if the borough president's office, I think Richard is on, and then Dan Wiley from the congressman's office. So Cesar, Richard, and then Dan. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of respond directly to Jenny's question about initial thoughts about some of these tools that we might have, and I really appreciate the perspective that you gave that the tools at the state level are definitely sort of medium term, long term tools, and I think from my perspective, we are at such a deficit here because of the historic the historic kind of like disregard that this district has had, that my initial reaction is to any of these tools, 100% absolutely. Let's put them all on the table. Let's get them, let's figure out a way of building consensus. Again, I think to Nick's point and to Marcella's point, among other communities across the state and the city, because I think some of these tools are, we needed them 2 decades ago, right? Not now. Like 2 decades ago, we should have had some of these tools, but for whatever reason, here we are today. So yes, I think absolutely. What I would love to, continue to kind of explore as we think about the current tools and then other tools that perhaps we still have not yet thought of or have not yet figured out, is I think what I want to see is, us in this district and with this sort of universe of people, including the assembly member, to double down on figuring out how to bring more people to the table to have this conversation, right? And I think, for me as chair of the community board, that's really what I've been striving to do, is to like really open up these spaces, because it's the thing that I really worry about is that a lot of the, vast majority of the constituents in this in this district, they are not the kind of people who historically have participated for structural reasons that exist that have kept people in the margins, but also I think because people have different priorities. And so what I want to, in addition to some of these conversations that we're having about tools, like what are we going to do to like really bring more people into this conversation, right? And again, I go back to what I started off with, which is it's messy, it's complicated, but I think it's the right thing to do for us to like really figure out ways of bringing more and more people to the table, particularly, an intentional look at folks who have historically been left out of these conversations.
Okay, thank you, Cesar. And we have another discussion. So this is an opportunity for Q&A. We have time at the end for discussion about next steps and recommendations. So I actually don't see questions being posed by the Borough President's office by Richard or Dan Wiley. I don't see your hands up. Do you have any
Katie,
questions?
their hands were up when they were attendees.
Okay.
Their hands went down. I don't know if you realized
Okay.
that when I promoted them to panelists.
Okay, fair enough. Do you have questions, Richard, or Dan? So I'll go to Richard first.
So not so much questions, but a few different levels here, right? So on one hand, the trucks do pollute when they drive in and out of neighborhoods. They may or may not be traffic hazards as they go through the neighborhood. So a couple levels. One is obviously legislation that could convert the industry to clean fuel is certainly something over time that will be beneficial because facilities are going to open. We've already had major complexes of FedEx and UPS in the boroughs already, right? So this is just morphing their business model a bit more. The routes that they take, are there things that can be done along the routes that they take? So you think about the obvious routes in Sunset Park, because that's your primary focus, that could be done to promote safety, right? This is a phenomenon not just in Red Hook, Sunset Park. I'm aware of facilities out in East New York. So for state legislation, it's connecting the other legislators that have those districts. It's also, I believe, read something that would be going on in the Bronx as well. I'm sure there's other places. So, it's networking all those neighborhoods the same way the environmental justice community came together across the borough, as one area, realizing there was another area. So it's kind of networking with like-minded community boards and advocates where things could be a universal message. Red Hook has a different issue because of where the truck routes are. I don't know if Sunset Park has the same kind of issues in terms of that the routes need to be adjusted from where they are.
Well, I think this is a really great opportunity to learn about some of these challenges and issues. And so I think what I would love to do is invite you to stay through the course of the meeting so that we can surface this in some of the discussion. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
Great.
And also
thank you so
regarding
much.
the port, just want to add on the port. So that's been the issue about working towards bringing obviously the goods. I mean, you have the beauty of having rail here. So what EDC has been working on in the inland highway from the Route 95 corridor, how we could take that. So the shipping companies, how they work that corridor to have facilities in multiple locations along that corridor that can feed New York, and the idea of having, like you have the nearby waste transfer station, right? So having that kind of infrastructure in place on properties that could promote movement of these goods is a conversation we've been having. Last, we want to mention zoning text is a way, right, to change things, but it's 2 to 3 years out if there's interest. And you could have zoning text just like we did for special permits for hotels not too long ago for self-storage. So you could have it based on size cutoffs, but it would take time and study. So it's not an immediate thing to get there.
So Richard, this is the third meeting that we've had where we've covered some of these issues. So I think this is an invitation to the Borough President's Office to lean into this issue, to understand some of these challenges. We've surfaced a lot of these questions. And so this is a great space for you to come to and the Borough President to learn about the process for. This is meant for questions to the Assembly Member's office. We have time at the end for discussion. We have another presentation. I just want to offer, Dan, I can recognize you. Do you have a question? And if not, then can you stick around for the discussion towards the end?
Yeah, I can stick around toward the end. I just put a placeholder just saying that some of the things that Richard was talking about has to do with how to mitigate something that's a reality on the ground. It seems like 3 sites that Amazon have are becoming realities since they're kind of dug in and built up. But I think working on multiple tracks at the same time while figuring out how to prevent future facilities, since only one of them is in Sunset Park so far with FedEx, is useful, and putting as much pressure to try to leverage mitigations with what is going. I just wanted to flag because there was the point about rail is we have a support letter for a trailer to barge MARAD, that's a Marine Highway grant that's being decided right now actually to bring money to look at how to reduce some of the truck traffic. So just flagging that.
Okay, great. No, thank you for raising that. I will, in a quick order, Cynthia, I think your hand is from earlier. So what I would love to do is ask Uprose and Earth Justice. I'm just seeing if our speakers are here. Should be Sharon. Yes, I see Sharon. Okay, great. We'll go Sharon, and then you can kick it off.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sharon Serrincon, and I'm the Climate Justice Organizer at Uprose. I'm here tonight with our partners at Earth Justice to share some of the impacts of and many concerns about these giant last-mile trucking facilities and how we can work together to start holding these private developers accountable. As we all know at this point, these private developments will have significant impacts on health, air pollution, traffic, transportation safety, public infrastructure, and the ability for the largest industrial waterfront in New York City to host well-paying, career-building green jobs that also address our climate change and community well-being needs. So we propose drafting a collective community letter that will include a list of demands and site and operation requirements for these last-mile facilities. The letter would be signed by community members, community boards, and elected officials to send to developers. This is an opportunity to show a united front to center community-based planning, leadership, and priorities. These are our demands. First, these developers are not subject to any public review processes, so we need to demand transparency on their proposals, such as timelines of their developments, copies of their site plans, operation plans, and scopes. Our second demand is for environmental review. Even though these last mile facilities are being treated by the Department of City Planning as warehouses and as of right development, we all know that they have distinctly different impacts than a regular warehouse. Our community already has so many polluting facilities. And then in terms of site requirements, as was mentioned, we demand truck electrification. So normally warehouses, depots, and ports escape environmental regulation because most of their emissions are related to their operations versus on-site or source pollution. But these facilities attract and cause a lot of vehicle traffic that makes air quality worse. Electrification, in conjunction with other strategies to slow down and manage the growth of these facilities, can eliminate tailpipe emissions and GHGs and improve local air quality. Thank you for your time. And now I'm going to pass it off to our partner Alok at Earth Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, CB7, and thank you, every Assembly Member's Office. Appreciate the time. My name is Alok Disa. I'm a Senior Research and Policy Analyst with Earth Justice in the Northeast Regional Office. Happy to be here alongside Uprose and alongside all the other community members and community board members here. I want to talk about a few things that are in sort of Earth Justice's wheelhouse with respect to the air pollution issues in particular. But first, I want to recognize that I know that it's only one factor that makes these facilities so problematic. I know there's a lot of concerns about safety and roads, and there's really great discussions about maritime solutions in chat. So I think we're going to need an all of the above approach here. But I do think the the air pollution angle and how it intersects with our ongoing climate law and how it intersects with the ongoing public health crisis and the air quality problems we have makes this a really compelling point to what the CB members were saying earlier, that the CB7, the last mile special committee members were raising, is that we got to connect. We need connective tissue to bring all the different communities affected. That's what's going to give us the political power and the voice on this issue. And this is happening across the state. And I think one aspect of that is the air pollution issue. And so I'm just going to highlight a couple of quick pieces about that. I know folks know about that already, but I just want to underscore a few things because I think they're really important as we communicate about this issue. We know in New York State and the region, air pollution is already a major issue. New research only underscores the health impact and the disparate exposures in communities of color. The World Health Organization just recently ratcheted down the amount of particulate matter that they deem as safe, which would put almost all of New York State above into the unsafe threshold, even though we're currently in compliance with federal standards. If the modern research tells us that we actually are all breathing really poor quality air from particulate matter, which leads to asthma, cardiovascular issues. It's a big problem right now. The other thing is ozone. New York State is currently out of compliance with the ozone standard in the federal ozone standard from 2008, and there's a newer one from 2015. We're out of compliance with that. We're in serious non-attainment is what they call it, but basically it means the ozone issue is not really getting any better in our region. The best way to deal with that is through truck electrification. Why is that? Well, we know that trucks, even though they account for just a small portion of the overall vehicle fleet, they account for 52% of NOx emissions. NOx is nitrous oxide that forms ozone, and then 45% of PM 2.5. These impacts really hurt communities of color and low-income communities in the city and in the state and in the country at large. So this is, and you add, this is already breathing this really bad air quality, and then you add hundreds of vehicle trips from each of one of these facilities. It's going to exacerbate that issue, and it's going to contribute to the climate crisis. And all this diesel exhaust, it hasn't been studied in the context of last mile facilities, not just from any one, but the aggregate of them, the cumulative impact of them. So we need to study that to figure out how all that traffic pollution, what are the actual impacts going to be if we're going to have them in our communities? And I think that's a really important point. So I'll speed through a couple of these things, but I want to highlight a couple state level options, Clean Air Act options that I think are going to be really important, that I think are going to be viable. They are going to be long-term strategies that we're going to need to really think big picture about and in conjunction with different communities, different stakeholders. But I think they're going to help us get to where we want from this air pollution and truck pollution angle. The first was mentioned earlier. So thanks to the Assembly members team and Anna for talking about the indirect source rule. I just want to underscore why I think that's such an important element, because it's the only way that the best way, maybe not the only way, but the best way to get these facilities that could otherwise don't have a single smokestack to get them under the air permitting regime. Now, as folks mentioned, there are other laws that apply to diesel trucks, but they don't need permits at a facility level. But for an indirect source rule, you could get warehouse electrification incentives or fees on polluting trucks at a facility level. Right now, that has recently been adopted in California. It provides a really exciting model, and I know there's some litigation around that, so we have to watch how that goes. But I think that's a model for New York State to go forward with, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. The next thing, the last thing I want to talk about really quickly is the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, which is currently it's the first ever regulation that would require sales of zero emission trucks. It was recently finalized in California, and New York State has the authority to adopt it, and it is in fact under a rulemaking process right now to do so. It would jumpstart the transition to zero emission trucks by requiring that manufacturers make available and sell an increasing number of these vehicles. It would lead to billions in health benefits and cost savings because electric vehicles are actually cheaper to operate over the long term. And so there is a rulemaking process underway, as I mentioned. DEC is going to have a hearing on November 9th, and written comments are being accepted through November 17th. I think this is a really important first step to create that market for zero emission vehicles. And then we need those mandates to make these polluting facilities buy those vehicles. And that's another step of the process. But I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions. And again, thank you so much for the time.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Sharon, as well. So we have probably take some questions for our two presenters. I just wanted to go back to, you ended with the advanced clean truck rulemaking. You talked about the indirect source rule, but you'd also brought up the violation of specifically on the ozone, right? And is that then something like, is there a specific action associated with that you were referencing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important for people to know. And theoretically, the state should be, and the federal EPA should be working together to make sure that our region comes down. They ratchet down those emissions so we come into compliance with the standard. I think it's less clear what the specific hook is, but one thing we know that through these air quality standards, they typically, the status quo has been to create more and more controls from these really big emitting like power plants and things like that, which are really important, obviously, but they've sort of ignored the contribution of trucks and motor vehicles through that process. And so I think just, I don't know that there's a specific hook, but asking DEC as they come up with the plan, they're required to have this plan to meet these standards. How are they going to get into compliance? By making that, forcing them to consider truck emissions and put that into the plan and come up with a concrete plan, and then truck emissions generally, but then of course at these localized areas where they're concentrated, I think will go a long way. And so that's also an ask of EPA, because EPA ultimately has to approve that plan. And so we should ask EPA, you can't approve it if they're not going to show that they're going to comply. They can't meet this standard without really ratcheting down emissions from trucks. So I do think it's less of a concrete ask, but there are some intervention opportunities there as well. So great question. Thank you, Katie.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to open it up to questions. Sharon, could you say one more time the action that Uprose was proposing?
So basically, we want to have a community letter with all of the demands outlined and site and operation requirements. And the letter would be signed by community members, community boards, and elected officials to kind of create one cohesive and united message to send out.
Okay, thank you. I can, thanks, Sharon. I have some just one hand up. Okay, I'll go to Nick. The next thing in the agenda is public comment and then our discussion. So I see the hand up. We'll go to Nick.
So, Alok, my question is primarily for you. So it sounds like there was more of a stick approach there. Is there a carrot approach as well in terms of incentivizing vehicle fleets and things like that? I most feel like you need either heavy tax, incentive or rebate or something like that on one hand. Secondarily, depending upon how far you go with that, would that thinking also apply to federal highways as well? And then how does that shake out in terms of legal repercussions?
Sure. Thanks for those questions, Nick. They're both spot on. There are carrots that I think are really, really critical to this approach, especially for trucks. As I mentioned very quickly, I spouted it off, but over the long term, the study shows that because electrification is cheaper than diesel and they have fewer parts, so it costs less to maintain these things, they save money over the long term, but there is that upfront cost. So I do think state programs and federal programs, incentive programs, really funneling towards these specific areas where the emissions are being concentrated are going to be important. There's currently a state program run through NYSERDA that is currently funded through like the Volkswagen settlement funds. It's not a permanent funding stream. Earth Justice has asked that the state make that a permanent funding stream. Now, it's a little bit above my pay grade in terms of exactly
not how NYSERDA works, but yeah.
Yeah, what the exact mechanism is and how they want to appropriate that. I think the assembly member can help us with that probably more than I can. And also the federal, we know from the budget, the reconciliation process, and who knows how that's going to go. I'm not going to prognosticate on that issue or the bipartisan bill, but there are, even in the COVID relief bill, there were funding streams for trucks and for buses and school buses. And I think there are pots of money that are making themselves available. And I think we need to just make those continuous and ramp them up a little bit more.
One other related question, just very briefly. In terms of electric versus diesel vehicles, I'm assuming the fuel costs were also calculated into that metric, or were they not?
Yeah, they were. Yeah. So there's this metric called like the total cost of ownership. So it looks at a whole bunch of things like driver training and maintenance and fuel costs and fuel, not just the fuel cost, but the instability, because like the price shocks for diesel. Electricity is usually more stable. So that's what it looks like.
We'll talk more. We'll get you offline.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, happy to have a dialogue about that. To your second question, I am not prepared to answer the exact question about the federal issue. I know there are preemption issues around that, so it might be a little bit trickier in how it interplays with the federal DOT side. No, I don't have that answer at the tip of my tongue right now, but I do have a team that's looking at that. So if folks are interested, I can maybe get back on that.
Okay, we'll definitely follow up. Thank you. I don't see any other hands from community board members. So I'm going to move into public comment. I want to recognize Carolina, who's had her hand up, and then Maria Roca. And
Katie, just before you call them, I just wanted to mention to our presenters, there are some specific questions in our Q&A that have gone to some of our presenters. We would appreciate it if you will look at those as well and answer what you can. Carolina, you can unmute yourself now.
And Jeremy, can you help with our timer for public comment?
So folks, if you look at my screen, you will see a 3-minute timer.
Hi, I'll be brief. For those, I don't know who's on the call, besides those of you I can see. So I'm Carlina Salguero. I run the maritime nonprofit Portside, New York and Red Hook. For those who are not watching chat or can't watch it for whatever reason, I just want to state the request I had there. I've been talking a lot with the kind of other group, the now called SB Comms group, South Brooklyn Coalition, did a long name about all this stuff. And a number of people there have said that they want some help understanding, I think it's the maritime terminology and various things pertaining to the options. Whenever I or Jim Tampakis speaks, they don't fully understand. And I will confess, I'm not certain as to what it is that is either not understood or people want to have explained. So I'm just speaking up now to say, please send me questions and suggestions. If you are willing to be a reader of what I draft, I would love to hear from you as well. And you send it to me. My name is spelled like Carolina, like the states, at portsidenewyork.org, spell out New York, okay? And that's basically all I have to say. I've put a bunch of other stuff in the chat in there. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Carolina. Maria Roca would be next. Jeremy, with your help.
No problem. Maria, you can unmute yourself.
I am unmuted, right? You can hear me, folks?
Yes,
okay,
we can.
So I'm not sure if anybody else saw this. It's just a little bit of election gossip, maybe. But at a public event yesterday, Eric Adams, assuming that he would emerge triumphant as the next mayor of the United States.
Think you're muted, Maria.
Maria, we lost you. You're muted again.
Maybe there we are. I'm sorry.
You were muted.
I inadvertently touched the microphone icon. Okay, fine. So let me go back. Just simply that, I don't know if you heard this part, that at a public event, Eric Adams mentioned that when he emerges triumphant, the decision, it wasn't exactly this way, so I'm paraphrasing, of course. The hint was that Idanis Rodriguez would be DOT commissioner in his administration. So if that seems like, I think we need to, I certainly would look into what Mr. Rodriguez has, future Commissioner Rodriguez has responded in areas of transportation and the like, because that certainly would have an impact on these topics and these conversations that we're discussing today. But further than that, that's just a little bit of gossip, I guess, and because it's not fact. I want to say that DOT, interestingly enough, has responsibility for street safety, though, we believe that they've been effective, positively effective, or not done as much as they need to do. For, I think, decades now in CB7 and in other neighborhoods, we have talked about building bump outs at the corners of residential intersections so that trucks of a certain size cannot make the turns after they migrate from truck routes like they do on 39th Street, where they then sometimes they block traffic. It's extremely dangerous because the driver, because the cab is so high, doesn't see a child go crossing the street. We have had enough of those accidents in New York. I think all of us know that that is a problem, but that is something that the DOT can do. They have the authority to build those. We have asked for that in Sunset Park, and there was always a reason why not, why they were not needed, but then we settled, I guess, for the time being, for humps on the streets like we have on 41st and other streets that do help because it's, but nevertheless, so somebody else already talked about the water, but the other thing is that we're talking about trucks. We seem to be only talking about trucks as being what is going to be running around the neighborhood and creating. This delivery companies have these electric bike trains that they hook up to each other depending on how much they want one delivery.
Maria, please wrap up.
Yes, and those are, they are so dangerous. So we need to include those, not just the trucks, in what their delivery methods are. And also back to DOT, they are also the city bike people. And look what they've just done in Sunset Park, putting all these city bike arrays all over the place with literally
Thank you, Maria.
Against what the community wanted, because the community was
Thank you.
They ignored it. So please, so there's all these other issues that are all part of the flow and the safety on our streets.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you,
That issue was in our transportation committee. I would invite you to speak to the transportation committee about the city bike issue. This, of course, is the last mile trucking committee.
Yes, thank you. And yes, whether it is a electric truck or an electric bike, it can still hit you and kill you. And so safety is a major concern. I want to recognize for public comment, then we're going to go into committee discussion on next steps. Where do we go from here based on everything that we've heard? 3 minutes on the clock again. Just thank you for the courtesy of that, Tom Murphy. And after that, I don't see any other hands. Thanks.
Tom, you could unmute yourself.
I just did. Did I? Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Oh, that's good. Just want to bring you back to home base. Sunset Park is in the Gowanus corridor. There's only 3 street routes that go through streets. One is 3rd Avenue, one is 4th Avenue, one is 5th Avenue. They cannot be interfered with. And primarily, you got to remember there's 7 lanes on the Gowanus Expressway, and there's 10 lanes. Robert Moses paid for 10 lanes, and he got 10 lanes at the ground level. That's 17 lanes on 3rd Avenue. First and foremost priority for anybody talking about this is you want to keep the trucks west of 3rd Avenue. End of story. You can't stop them. They're coming. There is demand, and demand is bringing trucks. Texas University does a study of traffic congestion, and for years running, the Gowanus Expressway in the morning was one of the 10 busiest routes in the nation. You're not going to interfere with it. Just keep them out of the residential areas. That is your first rule. And that's a problem of enforcement.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, Carolina, if it's okay with you, I'd like to go to Matthew because he hasn't had a chance to talk yet for public comment. So we'll go to Matthew and then Carolina.
Matthew, you could unmute yourself.
All right. Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. I'm going to try to be quick. My name is Matthew Grandin. I'm a resident of Red Hook. I have a fabrication business in the Navy Yard. I'm a transportation enthusiast. I bicycle, pedestrian. I drive trucks. I've worked in theater industry. I have daily experience with our immediate roads. My comments are on like the personal experience observing overlength illegal trucks and trailers in our immediate area. They damage parked cars, damage city trees, they damage signs, cause a lot of traffic. And, you know, our city isn't designed to take these extra large, over 50-foot trucks. Basically, it seems like there's a little bit of background on trucking. 53-foot trailer is the most commonly used trailer. A lot of these trucks are independent contractors that don't necessarily work for the facility, come from very far away. They may have never driven to Brooklyn before. So we basically need more enforcement of these extra long trucks, which cause extra damages and aren't allowed to be here already. Why are they here? It's profitable for the trucking industries, get more stuff in a larger truck, and the lack of enforcement by NYC DOT and NYPD doesn't decentivize the practice. Also to DOT, like there's locations in the city that allegedly receive overlength deliveries all day long. So the lack of enforcement has made our neighborhoods more profitable than maybe they should be for the trucking industry, which is a little bit of how we've got here in the first place. This is already on the books, and I'm curious whether increased enforcement in our community could help mitigate some of the blatant traffic and property damage. I guess, how am I doing on time?
You still have 55 seconds.
You know, does local NYPD do a lot of enforcement on this VTL 385, the length of the truck? Have we had any, you know, is there any stats on that? And does anyone think that that could help with some of the immediate local traffic and safety problems in our neighborhood? I think that's all.
Thank you, Matthew.
I appreciate you guys all taking the time to listen to all of us. I've tried to just keep up the last couple meetings, and there's a lot of content.
So Katie, let me just tell Matthew, we actually don't represent Red Hook. This is Community Board 7. Community Board 6 represents Red Hook. I believe Red Hook is the 76th precinct. I could not tell you anything that the 76 does. I could only tell you about the 72. And we have been asking for increased truck enforcement and other types of enforcement for well over a decade, and we have not received anything of significance.
All right.
Can I go to Carolina and then Maria? And then we'll turn back to the community discussion so we can go to committee discussion and go to next steps.
Carolina, you can unmute yourself.
Thanks so much. I'll be super quick. I just forgot to mention this last time. So as some of you may have heard before, there's a man, Bob Kunkel, K-U-N-K-E-L, formerly associated with the Mary Whalen back in the day. He's designed a hybrid freight ferry. You can read about it in landlubber press like the New York Times and the Marine Press. He offered about a year ago to provide a free tour on his ferry to look at the sites, you know, in Red Hook and Sunset Park. And that hasn't happened a bunch of reasons. And I confess I may have complicated it in that way of having perfect, what is the expression? Having perfect get in the way of the good, wanting to get all this information in the community about explaining maritime before we got out there on the water so people were not lost. and the clock has run between what I am overwhelmed with here, what he's been busy with his company, etc. And so given the pace that these warehouses are being built, I told him today, I propose that as soon as he is willing, we do the tour regardless of whatever state of maritime education there is. So I now want to know, are there dates that you all would recommend, or are there blockout dates or suggestions? You can email me or get it to CV7, we'll talk, whatever. That's it. Thank you for the second opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Carolina. Maria?
Maria, you could unmute yourself now.
I'm here. Just from the last few comments, it's clear that dividing this issue that encompasses, it's at so many levels, it encompasses different agencies, that separating it. And I was wondering, is there somebody from the Transportation Committee, like the chair of the Transportation Committee at CV7 on this call? Is this person present? Because a lot of great things are happening here, are being said here and are being presented. And the fact that this involves the city bike, this involves street safety, all of these things cannot be discussed in absentia of the others, in isolation. Otherwise, we continue doing the same thing we've always done. And when I mean we, I mean the city, is that, oh, no, that's their job. And we're here and we don't do this. And they just keep passing the buck and, oh no, it's their problem. That's their job. It's not ours. When the streets have all these problems and all these vehicles are on the street at the same time, all ages are on the sidewalks, crossing the street, going to work, going to school. And we just seem to be talking around, we're like on a treadmill, and we're not going to get anywhere until we put it all together. It's the same streets, the same sidewalks. It's one piece of land, and everybody needs to be on it. Please, let's not divide and allow them to conquer, because we have divided the issue. We're dividing the issue. We're not saying, oh, no. You either look at this all holistically, or we know it's not going to work, because this is what's been happening for decades and decades and decades. So please, the NYPD, why isn't the 72nd precinct on this call? Talk about, we just talked about enforcement, and everybody was smiling. I could see me like, yeah, sure, right. We know the reality. They should be listening to this. There should be somebody assigned by the captain to attend these meetings, to listen to what the community is doing, and for them to have input, because they do have staff that only does the highway, they have that is in their purview. It is not that they have nothing to do with this. They do, and they have to be involved, and they have to do their job, and they have to be responsible, and therefore they have to be part of these conversations now, not down the line, because we have not held them accountable. We have to hold them accountable. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, so we're going to move into thank you, Maria. We're going to move into the committee discussion and kind of moving towards next steps. And so I just want to recognize again, there's a couple committee members that are here. There are also a bunch of board members that are here. Thank you for coming. If you would like to be on this committee, we would love to have you. And I see Karen is on, and Antoinette and Cindy and Julio and some others. And just to acknowledge earlier, Zach Jacey is on the committee. He's the chair of transportation. I'm on the transportation committee, and I'm chairing this. We've got a bunch of overlap. You've got John Fantillis, who's the head of land use, who's on this committee. So again, there's a lot of overlap. And the reason we created this committee is because we need to draw attention to it. So, okay, this is the next step. So we're kind of continuing the conversation, next steps and actions. We have had a presentation by the State Assembly Member's Office on state level legislative options. We have heard from Uprose and Earth Justice on actions that Uprose is advancing related to a community letter that I'm sure that they will provide further details on. You also heard a little bit of Earth Justice talking about some in support of some of these state legislative options like the indirect source rule, some rulemaking that's happening right now on advanced clean trucks, and the larger kind of infrastructure bill questions. But Community Board 7 members, I would love to get specific with you. I would love to get specific on some next steps. And what we can do now in the next month and a half before the end of the year and before January when we have a new administration at the city level and walk into state legislative option. Some initial, we've been on the record, this community board has been on the record in terms of the vision of what we want to see, the kind of development that we aligns with some of these values and interests. And we've also been on the record asking for different things like a transportation study, like understanding the implication of something like the 20th Street corridor and where trucks and routes will go. We've been on the record, but this committee has not been on the record outside of these 2 meetings that were convened in May and July. So a first step in that direction is being able to have a coherent summary of some of these challenges and options, and a invitation to keep not just keep meeting as a community board, but actually have attention to this issue from the city, the state, and the federal level. We have not actually officially done that outside of these 2 meetings. And that's a first step that the committee can advance, that can also then go to, of course, the larger community board, and that can go to the individual agencies. This is a first step. So that is one step in a direction, but I'm very interested in now opening it to you and we've been talking about the problems and the challenges and heard some ideas around solutions and would love to hear about what you think on next steps. For practical matters, I see Cynthia's hand up and then I will go to John Fintilla. So Cynthia.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay. One of the things that seems to be resounding over and over at this particular committee and also at the transportation committee meetings is, the issue of safety. Someone mentioned here that one of the responsibilities of the DOT is safety. Now, along with that, I kind of sort of like hear that even though they're responsible for it, they have no hand in enforcing it. So my question seems to be that how can we enforce traffic laws if no one is watching? And I would like to see something in the community letter that's going to be developed that addresses a lack of enforcement on the part of the state DOT. So that's all my comment that I wanted to say, to add that please to the letter.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. John, and then Nick.
I guess a follow to what Cynthia just said, and maybe it's a question for you, Jeremy. Why do you think our local precinct doesn't put any priority on traffic enforcement? Or is that,
So John, I was at a meeting with 8 of the 9 community boards that are part of Brooklyn South, which is the 9 Southern Brooklyn precincts. We were all asking for traffic and truck enforcement, saying we're not getting it. So it's beyond our precinct.
But is it because the only person that can ticket a 53-foot tractor trailer is a authorized police officer? I know, the Triborough Tunnel police officers can ticket people who are coming out of the tunnel.
Yeah, I don't believe they have. We're not talking about the folks coming out of the tunnel. That might be CB6 who could ask for that. I think the tunnel leads to CB6. For us, it would be surface level enforcement. which would be NYPD.
I mean, we also have a whole bunch of red light cameras floating around. You would think that those cameras could also, capture trucks not being on the right street or doing.
That would require legislation. Right now, there's speeding cameras and there's red light cameras, and that's what they're allowed to, the data they're allowed to collect.
Oh, and that's it. Well, the other thing that note, again, not a lot of this stuff actually Cynthia raised, or Maria actually raised, the whole thing about New York sidewalks. I mean, one of the largest class action suits was against the city to build pedestrian ramps for accessibility purposes. And, how many street corners, I'm sure in your neighborhood and everybody's neighborhood, you've seen every street corner being rebuilt. Wouldn't it be great if we could just rebuild them 8 feet out in each direction and put a couple of bollards in so that it would really make it tough for a 18-wheeler to make that turn? But I mean, this is being done right now. Obviously, I know it took 10 years to get that suit filed by the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association, but the city had to comply, and they're doing it right now. They're rebuilding all these intersections. I'm not saying that litigation is the answer, but maybe there is something to be said of saying there's a civil right for kids to be able to walk to school in safety on the public way that we need to, really bear down on as a means to get what, trucks to stay in their lane. That's it.
Okay, thanks, John. This is for Community Board 7 members. You might be a committee member, you might not be, but you're Community Board 7 member. So looking for thoughts on next steps. We'll go to Nick. Any other hands, feel free to put them up.
I think two things. One, certainly drafting a letter, sending it to various electeds in terms of our intent is certainly merited. And then secondly, I think inviting potentially, or inviting and finding an environmental lawyer and then potentially a land use lawyer and or consultant of that nature to speak, to hear about really the feasibility of some of the legislative items that were brought up today, and or to maybe brainstorm additional ideas in terms of either mitigation, well, let's be real, mitigation for a lot of these uses.
Thank you. Sam Sierra?
I know, I just wanted to add that I also agree that we should certainly send out the community letter. We just have to figure out whom the stakeholders are that would be signed onto it. But I think it's a great idea. That's an easy first start that we can do. And I also feel that as we move forward in building this, that we should consider keeping the all last mile trucking west of 3rd Avenue. I think if we can't stop them, at least if we can, going forward, thinking to keep that traffic west of 3rd Avenue, I think that's something that maybe is somewhat doable or seeable. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I don't see any other hands up from committee members. So I'm going to go to Dan Wiley.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag regarding ticketing 53 footers or plus that there is a bill that is waiting to be signed into law by the governor, by Assemblywoman Joanne Simon and State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, which relates to having an automated system for ticketing these trucks in certain points where they're entering the BQE triple cantilever because the thing is falling apart. And we also know that there are all these repercussions on limiting the lanes to 2 lanes with backups. So I just want to point out that there actually is legislation to enforce in an automated way the oversized trucks as they're coming onto the BQE. That could be, once this is signed into law, that's something that maybe Assemblywoman Matenis' office could look at extending south and into other places. And the other thing I wanted to raise is that one problem there's the overnight deliveries and the late deliveries that then go out to last mile deliveries by van. So our truck rules, I guess is a question, our truck rules, do they apply to vans that are making the last mile delivery? Because the majority of the stuff coming out from these warehouses are going to be what Jim Tampakis likes to refer to as sprinter vans, which kind of implies that there's a danger there when they're sprinting.
I can actually just add one thing there, which is that specifically for the one on 537 Columbia, the Amazon Fresh facility, it's not just sprinter vans. They have what's called Amazon Flex, which is a program where anybody with a car can sign up to be a delivery driver. So there is absolutely no sort of regulation on the types of vehicles that will be leaving the facility, or oversight of the training that they're receiving.
Thanks, Noah.
Actually, Katie, if I could just interrupt on that,
Sure.
What Noah just said, also just reminds me of the fact that we have our Amazon grocery store at 40th, 40, it's in one of the Industry City buildings at 2nd Avenue, in addition to the one on the back side of Liberty View, where the shopping center. And those two locations are also private vehicle pickup spots for Amazon merchandise to be delivered. We see double parking, we see people backing in. Maybe we ought to update the map to show all those sites as well, because I don't think they're showing up on the map that we were showing earlier.
No, the map is just planned and under development trucking facilities, not necessarily what you're talking about is existing facilities that then have massive trucks. This is sort of the point that you're making around Amazon is this exists already as a distribution center that has massive trucking going in and out. And what we have focused on right now is what is being planned that we know about, and what is sort of in current build, not reflecting current pressures, current investments. What I am going to do, and I just, again, like you all are the 44 folks who have been on this call consistently since 6, and I want to appreciate that, and also the folks from the public who've joined. This is to propose a way forward. We heard very clearly from the Assembly Member's office, there was a call to action. There was a call to action to join the research committee. We heard both presentations from UPROS and Earth Justice around some of the community organizing efforts that they are looking at. I heard Carolina talk a little bit about another community effort that's happening around SB comms that Carolina, if you're still on, you can drop in the chat for folks. Let's talk about what we as the community board can do, and the facilitation role and the convening that we can do. So between now and the end of the year, we have a December board meeting. What I'd like to do in November is to convene this committee again to spell out very clearly the identifying, of course, like what's in this letter, inclusive of what are some of the recommendations and actions, and inclusive of who should get it. I also very much want to invite the committee members, the folks who are not on the committee who want to join, to advise, make recommendations on who else should be at this meeting. I already heard some things. I heard police and enforcement. I heard, again, we have the borough president's office here again. I would very much invite them to come back. We have some elected representation here, but not all. And so really identifying this can't be sort of this like patchwork approach. We very much, I think, have the ability and the opportunity as community board to convene and sort of mend some of these opportunities. So I would also, again, ask the committee members There was a call to action around outreach and getting more folks to this meeting. I want to recognize, I think Pioneer Works had put together a flyer, which was wonderful to have a flyer for this meeting. But in terms of really thinking about what outreach looks like and more facilitation to bring more attention to the community board's efforts on this, it takes all of us. So I'm going to, do I have to like officially, Jeremy, have a request to end the meeting as opposed to the
Motion to
CD7
adjourn.
meeting? A motion to adjourn? Do I need a motion to adjourn? Okay, so
But
I'm
Nick
about,
just made one, I think.
okay,
Second.
okay. So great,
Second.
seconded. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
See you soon. Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Stay safe.
Good night.
Have a good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.